lonely widow was auctioned for infertility, until a Comanche warrior of 6 made her his world. The wind had teeth that morning. It bit through cotton shawls and nipped at the bones of every man and woman huddled in the square. Dust moved like whispering ghosts along boot tracks, slipping beneath wagon wheels and curling into skirts. No one spoke unless they had to. Even the children were silent, sensing something ugly about to unfold. At the center of town stood a wooden platform, 3 steps high and stained with the weight of too many names sold off like regrets. It groaned when the auctioneer climbed it, slick-haired and smiling with teeth too white for a place like this. He tipped his hat, but it wasn't kindness, just habit. His voice rang out, thick as smoke and just as choking. The crowd shifted, eager in a dull-eyed way. Folks came out not for need, but for spectacle. That was the kind of hunger they carried, the kind that liked to watch something fall apart slowly. Then came the widow. 2 men walked her out like she was cattle. Her head was bowed, but her back stayed straight. That stubbornness was the only thing left of the life she once had. A flour sack had been pulled over her head for shame. Some called it modesty. Most just didn't want to look into a face that reminded them of mercy they never offered. She was young, too young to wear so much grief in the shape of her spine. The auctioneer cleared his throat and announced her name, though it wasn't hers anymore. The man she'd married had taken it with him when he died beneath a caving-out at Bitter Rock Mine. All she had left was a dress on her back and a soot-smudged apron tied tight around her waist, as if the strings might hold in what was already broken. Infertile, the auctioneer barked, but strong. Knows I work a field, man a ham, cook for 5. A few men laughed. One said something cruel and unrepeatable. Another asked if there was a discount for used goods. The widow said nothing. She stood there, sack on her head, dust in her lungs, apron clinging to her waist like a prayer. From the edge of the crowd, a pair of dark eyes watched. He did not laugh, did not speak, just leaned against the wagon where 6 children sat quiet and wide-eyed. Their skin was sun-browned, their hair braided in black ropes or cut short to chase the heat. The littlest girl clutched a rag doll that had no arms left. The man's name was known only to some, and even then just whispered, Comanche. They said, a widower, father of many, dangerous once, but quieter now. Folks said he buried his past somewhere in the hills and raised 6 children with nothing but a hunting knife and 2 callous hands. He didn't look like he'd come for a wife. He looked like he'd come to make sure nobody bled. The bidding began low and lazy. 1 coin, then 2, then silence. A man near the front called out, "What use is a woman who can't give you sons?" Another spat at the ground. "Give her to the wash house. They'll take her for scraps." Still the Comanche said nothing. His children watched him like saplings waiting for the sun to turn. The little girl leaned in and whispered something. He didn't answer, just lifted one hand, slow and steady. The auctioneer squinted. 2 coins. The man nodded once. That it? No one answered. Even the laughter fell away. What was the fun in buying what someone else had already claimed? Sold, then, the auctioneer said, almost disappointed. To the savage. The widow flinched at the word, not because it hurt her, but because it told her who'd bought her. She had never seen his face. They led her down the steps with rope tied gentle but firm around her wrists. She stumbled once. No one caught her. When they reached the edge of the square, the sack was pulled from her head. Sunlight fell on her face like it wasn't sure she deserved it. Her eyes didn't search. She'd long since stopped looking for kindness, until she saw the wagon. 6 children. One held out an apple like an offering. The others just stared, not with pity, but curiosity, like she was a story they hadn't heard yet. The man helped her into the seat beside him. His touch wasn't soft, but it wasn't rough either. Just solid, real, the way a tree doesn't bend unless the wind earns it. She didn't ask his name. He didn't ask hers. The road out of town was narrow and slow. The wagon wheels creaked like old bones remembering younger years. The widow sat with her hands folded in her lap, fingers shaking so gently it almost looked like prayer. Behind them, the town folded back into the dust. No one waved. No one mourned. The platform would be cleaned and ready by sundown, for the next soul too poor to keep her name. She glanced once at the man beside her. He didn't look at her, just kept his eyes on the road. But in the curve of his jaw, the steadiness of his grip on the reins, she saw something she hadn't known in a long time. Not hope, not yet, but stillness. And after so much breaking, that alone felt like a beginning. And that was enough to let the wind carry the ashes from her apron and out into the wild where no one could weigh them again. The house sat in a bend of the river, low-slung and quiet, as though it had grown from the earth instead of being built by hands. Its timbers were sun-worn, corners softened by wind and years, but it held a kind of warmth that couldn't be nailed or carved. Smoke drifted from the chimney in a thin, steady thread. No rush, no urgency. Just proof someone lived there with care. The wagon slowed as they turned into the clearing. The children, 6 in all, jumped down one by one, boots thudding against the hard-packed dirt. No one shouted. No one ran wild. Even in play, they moved with a certain reverence, shaped by someone who taught without raising his voice. She stepped down last, careful of her balance, though her hands were free now. He'd cut the rope without ceremony before they reached the tree line. Didn't speak. Just handed her a folded cloth and gestured toward the dust still lining her palms. She'd wiped them clean in silence. The man walked ahead, lifting 2 water buckets with ease and disappearing toward the back of the house. She stood for a moment by the wagon, unsure if she was meant to follow. But one of the children, a girl with sunburnt cheeks and a thick braid down her back, tugged at her sleeve and pointed toward the door. Inside, the house smelled of cedar smoke, bread, and thyme. It was not a big place, but everything had its place. Boots aligned neatly by the wall. A shawl hung on a single nail. Dried herbs above the hearth swayed gently, as if exhaling. There was no cradle. She noticed it right away. There were beds tucked in the corner for the children, folded quilts like layered skies, a table set for 7, a fire crackling low, but no cradle, no signs of mother's absence, no ashes, no empty bottle, no locked-away relic of mourning, only the quiet absence, too soft to name. A door creaked open to her right. The man stood there, nodding once, and stepped aside. Inside, a small room, a bed neatly made, a comb placed on the windowsill, a bar of soap, pale green, set atop folded cloth. He did not speak, simply let the door close again. She sat on the bed and stared at her hands. They were red from the rope and the wind. One knuckle bled where she'd scraped it climbing down the wagon. She turned her palms up. The creases still held the scent of firewood and dust. She closed her eyes and breathed in. The children ate supper without noise, save for the clink of spoons and the rustle of bread torn by hand. She sat at the end of the table, not served last nor first. A bowl was placed in front of her by the smallest boy, who gave her a toothless grin and pointed at the stew with something close to pride. She offered a quiet thank you, though no one demanded it. The man sat across from her. He bowed his head before he ate, and the children followed. No words, just silence thick enough to feel sacred. Later, when the table had been cleared and the youngest tucked into bed, she found herself sitting on the porch steps. The stars hung heavy, scattered wide. The night was full of the kind of quiet that healed. He came out after a while, carrying 2 tin cups, set one beside her, then sat down on the opposite side of the steps. She could smell the warmth, roasted barley and cinnamon. Not coffee, but something gentler. Still he didn't speak. She wrapped her hands around the cup, felt the heat crawl into her bones. The man didn't watch her. His eyes stayed on the dark. But there was something in the stillness between them, as if words weren't needed to acknowledge the ache of what had been lost and the fragile beginning of something not yet named. In the days that followed, she worked. She hauled water from the well with the older girl, washed clothes with the middle boy, who liked to whistle between his teeth. She swept the porch, mended a ripped hem, boiled potatoes until they softened into clouds. The rhythm steadied her. The days passed not quickly but kindly. He spoke little, but he noticed a cup of milk left near her door when she worked too late. A shawl hung by the fence post on mornings when the air bit sharp. One afternoon, she found a pair of leather gloves resting on the steps, stitched by hand, size for her. Each gesture was small. Each one mattered. She learned the children's names in whispers and fragments. Waya, the oldest boy, had a serious face but gave her a carved bird on the fourth morning. Tiva, the youngest girl, liked to sit in her lap and hum without rhythm. None of them asked her why she had no children of her own. None of them looked at her with pity. She noticed the firewood pile never dwindled too far. The tools were always oiled. Evenings were spent in soft chores and softer song. And always, she listened for the sound of cradle that didn't exist. One evening, the Comanche's mother arrived. She came on horseback, wrapped in blue wool, hair streaked with silver and sun. Her face was lines and wind. She stepped down and looked the widow up and down with eyes that missed nothing. No greetings, just a slow nod. Later, while slicing turnips, the old woman sat beside her and spoke in a voice like worn leather. My son doesn't need more children. He needs breath and a good pair of eyes to remind him he's still alive. The widow kept slicing. Her hands did not tremble. The old woman patted her knee and said nothing more. That night, the widow watched the firelight flicker across the walls of her room. Her apron hung by the door, the hem still singed from years of ash and silence. The comb on the windowsill caught a shaft of moonlight. Outside, an owl called once. She didn't sleep right away, not because she feared the place, but because she didn't know how to rest in a home that didn't want anything from her. By the seventh morning, she began planting herbs just outside the kitchen. Thyme, sage, a bit of yarrow from a folded paper she found tucked in her old apron pocket. Her hands knew how to sow. She'd always known how to grow what wasn't meant to bloom. He passed her on the way to the stables, paused, and looked at the plot. Then back at her. She waited for a question. None came, only a nod, and then he walked on. That evening, she found a tin pail left beside the herbs. It was filled with lavender clippings. When the rain came the next week, she stayed on the porch and watched the children chase each other between drops. Tiva squealed with joy. The others hooped and leapt across puddles. The man leaned against the post near her, arms folded. She didn't speak. But when the Lilith slipped and cried out, she ran faster than thought, gathered her in soaked skirts, held her tight beneath the porch roof. The girl wept against her neck. When she looked up, the man was watching, his face unreadable. You're good with them, he said, voice like river stones. She nodded, unsure what to say. You don't need to give me children, he added. You've already given them a mother. The words didn't rush. They fell like snow, soft, quiet, changing everything the moment they touched ground. She turned her face away, blinking hard, heart clenching with something she hadn't let herself feel in years. That night, she didn't sit on the porch alone. He brought 2 cups, sat beside her. They watched the stars rise together, neither reaching out, neither rushing, just breathing the same air. And for the first time in a long, long while, she realized the cradle hadn't been empty. It had simply been waiting. The first snow came quiet, as though the sky didn't want to startle the earth. Flakes drifted like breath, soft and wandering, settling gently on fence rails and rooftops. The children rushed to the window with wonder in their faces, noses pressed to glass, fingers leaving foggy prints as they counted the first signs of winter. She stood behind them, holding a shawl freshly sewn, the corners stitched with tiny pine branches. It was for the oldest boy, Waya, who had outgrown his coat. He didn't ask for it, hadn't said a word, but she noticed the way he pulled his sleeves over his knuckles when the wind turned. He took the shawl with a simple nod, slung it over his shoulder without ceremony. Then he sat back down and resumed whittling a stick by the fire, but a smile ghosted the edge of his mouth. She had become something solid in the rhythm of the home. Soup in the kettle, hands always busy, quiet song in her throat. She no longer waited for the floorboards to creak with judgment or the children to pull away. They reached for her now, without fear, without questions. The youngest, Tiva, braided strands of the widow's hair each morning, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. But the man remained careful. His silences were less distant now, more like pauses between careful thoughts. He still rose early, splitting wood before the sun could stretch, still sharpened tools with reverence, still rode out with the older boys to check the traps and tracks. But sometimes she caught his eyes lingering, not in hunger, not even in longing, but in something gentler, a kind of wonder, as if he wasn't sure she was real. One evening, while mending a torn moccasin, she heard him step behind her. The children were asleep, curled in their corners like kittens in quilts. The fire cracked low, shadows dancing on the walls like quiet ghosts. He stood without speaking for a moment, then crouched beside her, lifting the thread she was using, running it through his fingers. "You sew like my mother," he said. "Fast, but with soul." She smiled faintly. "Soul's all I had left once." His hand stilled. He looked at her, the fire catching the brown of his eyes, and something passed between them, not urgent, not spoken, just known. She didn't tell him about the cold nights alone in the shed after her husband left her barren and bitter. Didn't speak of the whispered prayers for a baby that never came, or the time the women at church had refused to let her hold theirs, as though barrenness might spread like rot. She didn't need to. He already saw the shape of those scars in the way she folded laundry, the way she placed her cup down gently, as if afraid to take up too much space. He told her about his wife, though, about how she died in the middle of summer, fever running through her like wildfire. The baby she carried never took breath. The cradle had stayed empty. He buried them both on the north ridge, beneath the cottonwood tree that still dropped its leaves in sorrow. He said, "I kept waking up thinking I heard her humming, but it was just the wind, teaching me how to live without her." She didn't reach for him, didn't offer comfort, just sat beside him and let the words breathe. The next morning, the middle boy, Noken, ran inside with a bloodied hand. A trap had snapped too close. She moved quickly, cradling his fingers, wrapping them tight with linen and salve. He hissed, tried not to cry. The Comanche knelt beside him, murmured something low in their tongue. Then, without hesitation, the boy leaned into her, face pressed against her apron. That night, after the house settled, she stood on the porch alone. Snow fell again, softer this time, collecting on the railing. She didn't hear his footsteps until he stood beside her. "I see you," he said, voice rough in the cold. She looked at him. "I see what you carry, and how you carry them. Not just the children. The years. The weight." She couldn't speak. The words sat too heavy in her throat. "I don't want more children," he added. "I want someone who stays. Not because she has to, but because the fire here waits for her and she knows it." Her breath hitched. Her hands trembled. He turned, walked back inside. She stood there long after the door closed, snow melting on her lashes. The following days moved like dream and prayer. She sang while shelling beans, laughed when the boys made snowmen with crooked grins. She taught the youngest how to bake biscuits, their hands covered in flour, their giggles soft as bird calls. No one asked her to do these things. She just did them, the way a tree bends toward light, without needing to be told. One morning, while gathering eggs, she found a parcel wrapped in linen by the coop. Inside, a carved wooden brooch shaped like a flame, smooth and simple. She turned it over and found her name scratched faintly on the back. Not her given one, just a name the children had begun to use in whispers. Mama. She pressed it to her chest and stood there in the pale gold light, eyes burning. By now, she had stopped looking for proof she belonged. The warmth in the hallway, the way Tiva reached for her hand when she slept, the quiet nod from a man each time she met his gaze. These were things no paper, no preacher, no cradle could promise. But still, she wondered, would it always be silence? Would his kindness remain a shadow, never stepping fully into light? One evening, as the fire danced low and the wind began to howl, he returned from town with more than just supplies. His jaw was tight. He didn't meet her eyes. After the children had gone to bed, he sat at the table, running a thumb along the rim of his cup. "They say you don't belong here," he said. She stood across the room, arms wrapped around herself. "They said you were sold, not chosen, that a man like me couldn't claim a woman like you proper." Her voice came small. "Am I not proper?" He looked up, And for the first time, something fierce moved behind his eyes. "They say it," he whispered, "because they don't understand what love looks like when it's quiet." She crossed the room slowly, sat beside him, placed her hand over his. "I didn't come to be chosen," she said. "I came to stop vanishing." He closed his eyes, breathed her in. "Then stay," he said, "not as a wife bought, but as a woman who makes this house a home, without needing a cradle to prove it." And she stayed, not because she had nowhere else to go, but because for the first time in her life, the fire in a man's heart didn't demand anything of her but presence. It burned slow, it burned true, and it waited just for her. The day began with stillness, the kind of hush that made the animals quiet, made the trees listen. The wind, which had danced sharp and cold for weeks, now lingered against the skin like breath warming through cupped hands. The air smelled of thaw, wet earth, cedar smoke, and something unnamed like a promise beginning to stir. She stepped out into the yard with her apron tied high, a loaf of bread tucked beneath her arm, and a quilt slung over her shoulder. The children were down by the stream, laughing in bursts, boots splashing into half-melted snow. The frost had begun to recede, curling back on the soil as if giving permission. He was already at the fence, hammering down a broken rail. His sleeves rolled, eyes narrowed in the mid-morning sun. She walked to him quietly, handed him the bread without a word. Their fingers touched. He didn't look at her, but she felt the warmth pass between them like the wind had turned its face towards something new. They shared a smile then, brief but full. It might have remained an ordinary day, had the riders not come. 3 men, one in a stiff hat, the kind worn by government men, another young and sour-faced. The third wore a deputy star polished clean and sharp, though the dust on his boots spoke of cities, not land. They didn't dismount, only circled once and pulled up at the gate, eyes sweeping the homestead like appraisers at a sale. The Comanche stood still, hammer still in his hand. She stepped beside him, and the children fell quiet behind them, sensing the shape of something wrong. The man with the star spoke first. "You the one took in that woman? The barren widow?" She stiffened, but the Comanche did not move. "She's mine," he said calmly. "Bought her, did you?" The deputy sneered. "That auction wasn't legal. Whole town's talking. Folks saying you've no right to keep her here, not without paper or preacher." The man in the stiff hat added, "And these children, half-breeds, are they? No formal guardianship. Could be removed under civil law for placement." The words dropped like stones in a well. She stepped forward then, slow but steady, the quilt still slung over her shoulder, the bread still warm in her hands. "I was sold because no one saw worth in me," she said, voice even. "Not as a wife, not as a woman, only as labor, as silence. He didn't buy me. He saved me." The young man snorted. "You're not married." "No church says so. You don't got papers." "I've got a home," she replied, "and children who call me mother, and a man who's never raised his voice at me, nor made me feel small. Isn't that worth more than ink?" The Comanche stepped beside her, placing one hand on the gate, calm as wind before storm. "You want to take them," he said. "You'll have to take me down first." The deputy shifted in his saddle, eyes narrowing. The other 2 glanced at each other. The youngest muttered something about it not being worth the mess. And then from the trees behind the house came a new voice. "I wouldn't try it." A woman emerged, older, wrapped in a blue shawl, walking steady with rifle slung low across her arm. The Comanche's mother. Behind her came another, a white woman from town, the one who ran the feed store, barren herself, her chin held high and proud. "Been watching from the ridge," the storekeeper said. "You think this woman don't belong? Then neither do I." More figures appeared. A few townsfolk, quiet ones, the kind who didn't speak often but watched everything. One by one, they stood in the thawing light, arms folded, voices silent but firm. The man in the stiff hat scowled. "This isn't your concern." "It is," the Comanche's mother said, "because you think a woman's worth is only in her womb. And you forget that fire doesn't need to bear fruit to warm a home." The deputy cursed under his breath, spat into the dust, and turned his horse. The others followed, defeated not by violence, but by the quiet power of people standing still. As the hooves faded into the distance, the children rushed forward. Tiva wrapped her arms around the widow's legs, burying her face in the apron. The boys clustered close. Wyatt looked up at his father with something close to pride. The widow knelt, brushing Tiva's hair back. "You're safe," she whispered. "We all are." Later that afternoon, the Comanche took her hand and led her to the river. No words, just a hush of water and the chirp of sparrows returning to thawed trees. At the edge of the bank, beneath the cottonwood tree where he'd buried the past, he turned to her. He held out a ring. Not gold, not silver, just a circle carved from cherry wood, polished smooth by time and hands that knew how to shape loss into something lasting. He did not kneel. He said, "Not because I bought you, not because you stayed, but because you became the fire in this house. And I want to sit beside it until I turn to ash." Her throat tightened. She reached for the ring, voice trembling. I was never empty, just waiting for the right hands to hold me. They married that evening. No church, no paper, just children circling them with wildflowers, and the wind blowing warm for the first time in months. He placed the ring on her finger. She placed her heart in his hands. And as the sun dipped below the hills, the fire inside their home burned steady, watched over by stars and souls that had waited a long, long time to be seen. They say the land remembers. And when a woman once called barren plants roots in the soil and laughed in walls, the land calls her mother, because family is not born. It's built. And sometimes love doesn't bloom in the spring. Sometimes it waits until the day the wind turns warm. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe and tap the bell icon. More Wild West tales of love, loss, and quiet strength are coming soon.